there were one particularly incident, disturbing incident, which came to my attention in my first couple of weeks in the country, of two very brave gentlemen who refused to sign. Their names were Azimov and Avazov. They were members of Hizb ut-Tahrir who had been imprisoned. They were beaten, tortured, had fingernails removed, and they were being urged to sign a recantation of their faith, to deny their faith, and say that they supported the president, Islam Karimov. And also people are urged to name 6 or 10 other people to inform on others and say, this man attends an illegal mosque, this man. If you do this, sometimes you will be allowed to go, and they will bring in 6 other people in your place. These gentlemen refused, and also they refused to stop praying at the appointed times during the day, which isn't allowed in Uzbek prisons. They were tortured terribly, but they still refused, and eventually they were placed in boiling liquid and literally boiled to death. The mother of one of them, the mother of Mr. Avazov, was a very brave lady, an old lady. She had the body returned to her in a sealed casket. She was told under no circumstance was she allowed to open the casket before burial, and a guard was placed on the house to make sure she didn't. In the middle of the night, when the guard was asleep, she got the casket open herself, got the body out onto the kitchen table, and took many detailed photos. As a result of this, she then got the photos to the British Embassy. We were able to get those photos to the University of Glasgow Pathology Department, where the chief pathologist, who now incidentally is the UK's chief pathologist, said on the basis of these photos that the gentleman had died from immersion in boiling liquid, and it was immersion rather than splashing, because there was a clear tide line around the top of the arms and the upper torso, and beneath that there was 100% burning, complete coverage. We raised this case with the Uzbek authorities, and they said that the 2 prisoners who had died in a fight with a kettle. They'd been making a cup of tea and fighting and splashed each other with the kettle. That was the official explanation, and that's kind of the the standard of Uzbek government propaganda, if you like. And there was an interesting sequel, because the mother was sentenced, Mrs. Muhadirova. She was 69 years old. She was sentenced to 7 years hard labour for having taken the photographs to the British Embassy. In the end, pressure from the Embassy, managed to get that sentence reduced to a fine, which we in fact paid. But that's a quite appalling case, but it's not at all unusual. I mean, I've never seen people completely boiled to death before, but insertion of limbs in boiling liquid is a torture quite regularly used. And as I say, it's effective. People confess. 99% of these trials end in conviction. Almost no one is ever found not guilty. I've never come across a case of someone being found not guilty in an Uzbek trial, and they confess because they're beaten until they can't stand it anymore. I attended a trial in my first couple of weeks in Uzbekistan. A gentleman called Hudibagainov, who with 5 others was charged of membership of the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, of links to Al-Qaeda, and a whole string of other charges. And the trial was completely farcical. And one of the most interesting things about it, I went along myself and sat in court the day of the trial, was that the judge made a number of completely random anti-Islamic remarks for no apparent reason in the course of the trial. At one stage, he said to the prisoners, "How could you understand each other talking when you all have such long beards?" And then he started laughing, and all the officials and cronies in the court started laughing too, as though this was a great joke. And again, on very similar lines, he again just in the middle of the trial, for no particular reason, stood up and shouted at them and said, "How could you find time to commit so many crimes when you have to pray 5 times a day?" And again, the court officials, everyone laughed as though this was a hilarious joke. And just being there was absolutely horrible. It was like, it reminded me of television pictures I've seen of Hitler's show trials. It really was like that. And another old gentleman came to give evidence, and he had signed a witness statement to say that 2 of the accused, who were his nephews, had links with Osama bin Laden, had been to see Osama bin Laden and that kind of thing. And suddenly, I mean, he was obviously terrified. Suddenly he found defiance, and the old man stood up and said, "This is all not true. They tortured my children in front of me until I admitted to this. We don't know anything about Osama bin Laden. We are a family of small farmers from Andijan. What have we got to do with Osama bin Laden?" And I was very close to him when he did this, and you could just tell he was telling the truth. And actually, these people had no connection with Osama bin Laden at all. But the whole show trial idea was part of the Uzbek government's attempt to portray any Muslim, any pious Muslim, and portray any political opponent as linked to Osama bin Laden. The Americans, of course, are very happy to believe this because they have a big military base in Uzbekistan. They give Uzbekistan $120 million a year in military aid, about $80 million a year in security service aid. They really prop up this regime. So it suits them to have all this false evidence that all the opposition are linked to Osama bin Laden. It's hard to describe just how horrible the situation is. It really is. It's a living nightmare for the people there.
I have heard that in Uzbekistan there is this thing about the so-called ghost plane. Are you aware of such thing?
In my time there, I was aware that the Americans were flying people back from Afghanistan, in particular, from Bagram to Uzbekistan. Were bringing back Uzbek prisoners, and I was very much aware that these people would be handed over to the SNB, the Uzbek secret police, and almost certainly would be tortured. And there were a couple of cases where I was involved with the families in trying to discover what had happened to the people, because obviously if they were killed, they would tend to just disappear from the system. There'd be no official notification they'd been murdered or tortured to death or whatever very often. So I was aware of that. What I didn't know at the time, though it now appears to be true, was that the CIA weren't only bringing back Uzbeks from Afghanistan, they were also bringing other nationals to Uzbekistan specifically in order to be tortured. There seems to be an awful lot of good information on that now being gathered by